Now that we've added the capability for data loading, we need to actually do something with the data, right? The data is just being loaded into the dictionary and sitting there. So the next thing that we need to do is we need to make it so that potentially many elements are going to need to access the localization manager. And so what we're going to do is we're going to use the singleton design pattern to make the localization manager into a singleton. If you've watched these trainings before, this is something we've covered before, but I'll just give it a quick review for those of you who are new. So this is from Wikipedia. In software engineering, the singleton pattern is a software design pattern that restricts the instantiation of a class to one object. This is useful when exactly one object is needed to coordinate actions across the system. So basically, with something like this is pretty common with manager objects, right? If it's a game manager or a localization manager or a data manager, you really don't want there to be ever more than one of those objects because they might get into a fight and give each other a black eye and break your game, right? So in this case, we want to have some code which is going to enforce the fact that there will only ever be one localization manager instantiated. And so what we're going to do is to make this accessible from multiple places, we're going to make a public static localization manager variable called instance. So now if we need to access this class from, or an instance of this class from elsewhere, all we have to do is type localizationManager.instance.load localized text, for example. But we need to make sure that we never end up with more than one of these. So we're going to change start to awake, and in awake we are going to, and the reason we're doing that is we want to make absolutely sure that this runs first, right? It runs before any other things that need to happen, and awake is always called before start. So we are going to then check if instance equals null, right? Meaning there is no other localization manager existing, which is good, then instance equals this, right? And that's like the expected behavior. However, else, if something goes wrong and there somehow is more than one, then we're going to say else if instance does not equal this, right? Meaning this guy gets instantiated and discovers, wait, there's already a localization manager on the scene, then we're going to destroy this game object, right? So we do not want to have more than one at a time, so we're going to destroy this. Now, the other thing that we're going to want to do is we're going to want this object to persist throughout the life cycle of the game, right? Whatever scene we're loading, we want it to have access to the localization manager. So what we're going to do is we're going to call the don't destroy on load function, and we're going to pass in this game object. And what that's going to mean is normally when we load a new scene, as long as we don't load the scene additively, all of the game objects in the previous scene are destroyed, right? Everything is cleared out, and then the new stuff for the new scene is loaded in. When we call don't destroy on load, that's going to cause our localization manager not to be destroyed and therefore to persist even as we load scenes. Now, the issue that you may run into is if you do not have this code to enforce the singleton pattern and then this thing is not getting destroyed, you might reload the scene and end up with two copies, right? And we don't want that. So now the next thing that we want to do is we want to check if we want to be able to check if the localization manager has finished loading the localization data and that the game is ready to start, right? And this is a useful general procedure when starting up your game to make sure that all systems are ready to go before entering your actual gameplay scene, right? So this might be useful if you're connecting to an online service, for example, if you're loading some data, or maybe you're waiting to make sure some other process that might have a variable duration, depending on maybe the speed of the machine or the speed of a connection, you want to make sure that that's complete before you actually start. So in the localization manager, we're going to add a private bool called isReady. And that's going to be equal to false because by default, the localization manager is not going to be ready. But at the end of our load localized text function, we've either loaded the text or failed and thrown an error. Therefore, isReady is going to be equal to true. Now, of course, in your game, you probably want to try to handle this more gracefully than just throwing an error and failing, right? But anyway, for an example, it'll work. So once we have completed this function, then we should be ready to go. And so what we're going to do is we're going to give other classes a way to check with a public function called getIsReady, and that returns a Boolean. Whoops. And so now all it's going to do is just return isReady. And so we can call this whenever we want to check whether the localization manager has done its job, loaded the data, and we're ready to actually move to the next stage. So we're going to call getIsReady to check the value of isReady to see if the localization manager is finished. And we're going to do this from a new class that we haven't written yet called startupManager. And so this class is going to wait until the localization manager is ready, and then it's going to load the main game scene. So let us save the localization manager, jump back over to Unity, and in scripts, we are going to create another C# script that's going to be called startupManager. And this is really going to be a simple little script. We're going to get rid of update. We don't need it. What we're going to do is we are going to change startupManager to a coroutine. So instead of returning void, it's going to return an IEnumerator. And it's still going to be private, but we'll just be explicit about that. And so this is kind of a cool thing you can do where now this coroutine start will be started automatically when at the same time that start would be called usually. And what a coroutine will allow us to do is to have this function wait and delay execution of certain code. And what we're going to do is we're going to wait to see if the localization manager is ready. So we're going to say while not localization manager dot instance, right? And here we're using that static variable to access the localization manager. I'm just going to say LM to access the LM so that my tongue doesn't break off. So we're going to use the static variable to access the LM, and we're going to call getIsReady. Right? That's going to return a Boolean saying whether we're ready or not. And so as long as this is false, we're going to yield return null, meaning wait one frame. Right? So we start, check if we're ready or not. If we're not, we're going to wait a frame. Once we're done waiting, we are going to load the menu screen, right? In order to do that, we need the namespace declaration using Unity Engine .scene management. And then we just need to call scene manager .load scene, and we'll load it by name. This is going to be menu screen. And it's already been added to the build settings window in the project. So we're going to wait, and then once we're done, right, once isReady becomes true, we're going to call scene manager .load scene. Let's save this and return to Unity, and then we're going to, in our loading screen scene, we're going to create a new empty game object, which is going to be called startupManager, and we're going to drag the startupManager script onto there. So now it's sitting there waiting for its chance to load the next scene, and it's going to wait until these guys are finished loading. And remember, they are going to be finished loading shortly after we click this button. So we're going to click English. Of course, we're loading a tiny bit of data, so it's instant, and then that's going to load us into the English or into the menu screen, which by default is in English, right? If we load the German scene, it's going to be English as well because we're not yet pulling the data out of the dictionary and setting it at runtime. We're just loading whatever is, actually I'm not going to open that. We're just loading whatever is stored in that screen. But I am going to save my scene because I made some changes using Control S. So let me just take a look at the chat real quick before I move on to the next thing, and then we'll continue. Someone asks, isn't that problematic with the direct linkage between the buttons and the manager? It shouldn't be. I mean, it's true theoretically. If things went wrong, the manager might be destroyed, and that would break the buttons. But if you don't do something dumb and try to instantiate, well, no, actually, because the first instance of the manager, the one that we made the references to, should never be destroyed. It would only be the second one that would destroy itself. So no, actually, that should work okay. Yeah. Yep. Let me put the code up. There you go.